really happy to welcome Markus Montola from Finland. So we're jumping from Johannesburg right up to the northern hemisphere. Markus is a really interesting academic on pervasive games, but also a designer and an expert on the Nordic culture of LARPing, and that's what we've asked him to talk about today, because it's not really that well known around here that there's this super vibrant culture of fantastic games going on in places like Finland. So I'm very happy that you're here and looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much. Ooh, okay. So yes, my name is Markus Montola. I work at a Helsinki-based mobile phone location-based game startup called Grey Area. I'm the lead designer of the game called Shadow Cities that some of you might have been playing. However, today I'm talking about something entirely different. I'm talking about my research on role-playing games and live-action role-playing games that are played in Nordic countries. Also, you might have been reading the book called Pervasive Games. That's probably relevant to quite a few projects that have been played in this festival. Imagine for a moment that you're living in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is reaching its height, and everyone is kind of afraid of what's to come in the near future. The Soviets are moving missiles to Cuba, and Kennedy is definitely not allowing that to happen. And one day, there's an air raid siren, and you have to rush inside. And you rush inside a bunker that's prepared for the nuclear holocaust by the captain who lives, the veteran captain that lives in the same street with you. And you're running into the bunker with your family. You might be a communist who is kind of hoping for the Soviets to win, but still afraid of the nuclear war. Or you might be the veteran of some war, still hating the Germans or whatever. You might be a preacher. And you go into the bunker, and the bunker door closes, and you don't know anything about what's happening outside. Someone turns on the radio, and the news are slowly coming in, and the government is just saying that everything is okay, but this is kind of an exercise. But in some point, of course, it's turning out that in this alternate version of history, the nuclear war actually started. And you're sitting in the bunker, and the radio is telling you that the East Coast is being destroyed by nuclear missiles, and the American nuclear missiles are flying to the Soviet Union and destroying cities there. And since you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you know that it's an aerospace capital, so it's going to be one of the top targets. But you also know that it's a couple of hours west from the East Coast for the missiles to fly. So you're kind of wondering what's going to happen next. And you're sitting in this bunker, and it's about the size of this room, and there are about 25 people in that room. You've been there for 10 hours in this game. And it's very well designed to look like a bunker. You have full of cardboard boxes that are full of tinned food. You have some books in there. Someone bought some toys for their kid. And some hours into the game, maybe 10 hours into the game, the bomb hits Tulsa. And it turns out that all the cardboard boxes that you have in the room, they're not full of tinned food. They're full of loudspeakers, because the game masters wanted to make the nuclear detonation sound like nuclear detonation. And it goes on for a pretty long time. It's like 30 seconds or something, rumbling, booming noise. And you realize that the society as you knew it is no more. And then it's dark for 10 hours, maybe. Maybe someone has a flashlight. Maybe someone managed to turn the generator on. Maybe the newscast is again activated, and you hear that the United States is going to be destroyed in this war with the rest of the world, pretty much. When you've been in the bunker for 24 hours, the soldiers come knocking on the door, and you're led to something that is called safety in the middle of this Holocaust. This is an example of Nordic LARP, a LARP called Ground Zero that was organized in Finland for the first time in, I think, 1998. It's been played for 4 times. The next run is going to happen this fall, actually. And it's kind of an illustrative example of the potential of live-action role-playing games. So what is a LARP? One definition of LARP is that LARP is a meeting of people who, through their characters, relate to each other in a fictional setting. So you build an environment, you put people into that environment, and then you play games in that environment. It's really simple, And also it's really complicated. So you're pretending to be a family head in the bunker for 24 hours, and then the game masters are trying to figure out how they make you go through the experience they want you to go through. You're free to do whatever you want within the context. So if you're a preacher, you might be starting a sermon, or you might not. You might be crying in the corner if you feel that is what your character would do. Live-action role-playing has its roots in tabletop role-playing. Everyone knows Gary Gygax's and Dave Arneson's Dungeons & Dragons from something like 1978, depends on who you ask. And all the following products that follow Dungeons & Dragons, dozens and dozens of role-playing games where you mostly kill orcs, play elves, cast spells, and so forth. Stuff I love to do, actually, at home. But somewhere along the line, someone figured out it would be really cool to act out these adventures, take the sword in your hand and go actually after the orcs in the forest. Largely, this movement was promoted by an anti-D&D movie, Mazes and Monsters, that tried to demonify Dungeons & Dragons by portraying it as live-action role-playing game. Live-action role-playing games weren't widespread back then, so in fact Mazes and Monsters created much of this movement in the whole US. And this is how it usually looks like. People are in the forest, they're wearing cloaks and elf ears and wielding swords and so forth. If you're in Germany, it probably looks quite a bit better because the German LARP scene is tightly connected into the creative anachronism, history, reenactment scenes. They might have kind of period clothing made with period techniques. They might be wearing metal armor and so forth. But the core is the same. However, somewhere along the line, some people in the Nordic countries, especially I believe first in Norway, figured out that this is a potential powerful medium that we can use to create whatever we want. And when they put down the swords and realized that we can use the very same idea without the swords to portray whatever situation people are in the real world, it started kind of growing artistic and expressional ambition. This is a game called America from 1999. They wanted to criticize consumerist culture, so they filled an Oslo marketplace, a central square, full of trash, put it full of vagrants and hobos who were living in this junkyard in the middle of the city, looking into big buildings with rich people living in the middle of them in garbage and junk and trying to survive their everyday lives. It was kind of an attempt to kind of figure out how to kind of use live-action role-playing for artistic impact. Because the problem is, of course, if you want to take 24 people and put them in a bunker for 24 hours, you're probably going to preach to the choir, because the people who want to be there with you in the bunker probably are already against the nuclear war. But when you pour tons and tons of junk into the central square in Oslo, you might have the chance of getting some media attention and outsider attention as well. When the journalists entered the junkyard, they were treated to be completely in-game, like the journalists from the rich skyscrapers you can see around you. And they were shown the reality, or the fake reality of the people living in the junkyard. Sometimes it's felt that the LARP aesthetic works best in the closed spaces. So here's another example from the closed space. A Swedish group restaged Hamlet in a LARP form. They were 3 days in this bunker again, in the court of Denmark, waiting for the I think the communists to attack the kingdom of Denmark and Hamlet's court. And they were basically living in there for 3 days, feasting and carousing and drinking and politicking and bickering and having sex and feasting again. And it started with luxury, and it ended in depravity and corruption and everyone dying. And after 3 days of being there, the rule was they had different rules for every day. In the first day, no violence has no impact. In the last day, all violent actions, including evil words, escalate until someone dies, to create this Hamlet-like narrative where everyone is dead in the end. So LARP is Perhaps it could be described as improvisational theater meets social drama, meets happenings, meets digital gaming cultures, meets psychological experiments, meets military training simulations, meets commedia dell'arte, meets pretend play, meets improv, meets campus assassination games, meets Model United Nations, meets Dungeons & Dragons. It's kind of simple because it's the core of the expression is so simple. Go there and pretend you're someone. But since as adults, we have lost our connection to the basic fundamental children's pretend play, we need to do this kind of stuff to explain, go there, pretend play, engage in some daydreaming. So the Nordic LARP culture has been doing this and developing this form for 15 years. Our central meeting point is called Knutpunkt or Solmukohta. It's a traveling convention that rotates between the Nordic countries. And during the last 15 or so years, quite a bit of aesthetic discussion and discussion of the philosophy of LARP and potential of LARP has been going on. And I'm going to touch the most central points that are maybe valuable to you as street game designers. First one is the first-person audience. The idea of LARP is that you are the player and you are the audience. And you are the audience to your own playing. External spectator can never understand what's going on in a LARP situation. I'll give an example. This is from the executive game, a poker game played in Finland in 2001. What you're doing in this game, you're playing high-stakes poker with the mafia guys. So you're one of the silly guys who go there and bet their daughter's college fund, or you go in there and you bet the money you don't own that you have loaned, and you know that if you're losing all this money, you're going to be dead broke and in deep trouble. But if you win, you can win big. So you're pretending that the chips in the table are symbolizing real money for you, even though, of course, in reality, there is no money moving. And when you have a bad hand, you're pretending to other players that you have a good hand because you're playing poker, but at the same time, you know that you have a bad hand and you're about to lose, and you're pretending that this is all real money so that you kind of feel that this makes a difference to you. So when I'm watching you playing poker in this LARP, it looks to me like you have a good hand. And the performance to me is that you have a good hand. But the performance to you is that you know that you have a bad hand and you're betting all your money on it. And this is actually quite interesting because when I was listening to the theater talks yesterday, it's very clearly that this idea of first-person audience is very different from what improvisational theater tends to be doing, where the actors are there to serve the players or the audience, and the audience is then kind of the true audience. But here the actor is the audience, always. And it makes quite a bit of difference of what you can do. For instance, this is from Carolus Rex. They rented a submarine in Sweden, and then they turned the submarine into the flagship of the Swedish Space Navy. And then they were there in 24 hours fighting aliens. And when you are the audience to your own performance, you can forget about stage, for instance, and you can crawl in the tiny holes in the submarine and feel the claustrophobia and feel the vibrations from the loudspeakers as the enemy torpedoes hit your spaceship. And you're there alone in the middle of smoke generators and klaxons, and you're the target audience. You don't need to pretend to anyone else. But what is funny about this is that more you pretend for yourself, the better it's going to be for you. Because you can go there with a cynical attitude and try to detach from the experience. But this is very much what Nordic LARP is against. In Nordic LARP, immersionism is a central kind of philosophy of play and aesthetic. You're supposed to try to be in there as hard as you can. The submarine turned into a spaceship also illustrates another central ideal, that is the 360-degree illusion. This is something that's quite controversial in the Nordic LARP scene because it limits your design space quite strongly, but it also creates very powerful experiences. So the idea with 360 illusion is everything I see in the game must be part of the fictional reality. So every valve and every lever must be in the game. There must be no warning signs, don't push this button because the submarine will leave for real. Every player must be wearing period underwear that would be sufficient for the submarine crew, so forth. You can take the 360 ideal to very extreme places. One group that wanted to take the 360 ideal into strange places even built a dragon for themselves. They wanted to play a fantasy game in a village, so they built a village out of wood, and they built a dragon. The dragon was supposed to breathe fire, and actually it did, but it was broken in the transport to the game, so it couldn't do that in the game anymore, unfortunately. Because they spent like €500,000 in this game, it would have been cool to have the fire in there. They had live animals. No pretending to be a shepherd without an animal. No pretending to be a smith without a forge. No pretending to be a spellcaster without pyrotechnics also. So when they were calling for the thunder god to bring rain to the place, they were actually detonating dynamite in nearby areas to simulate the lightning strikes. So when the players went there afterwards, they could find the burnt and scorched and splintered wood. But they had $500,000, and they prepared for this LARP for 3 years. It lasted for 5 days or 7 days or something. The participation fee was €150. So, and you had to bring your own period clothing that was made of inflammable materials. Of course, one of the easiest and best ways of making this 360 illusion is, again, a very simple way of doing it. You just take the real world and you play in there. These people created a game called The White Road, 6 people. They didn't have a lead designer, they just played the game. So they wanted to transform into these vagrants, the road knights. In Denmark there is the vagrant culture with its typical kind of visual and cultural and social style. In order to be a road knight, you have to wear army surplus uniforms. It's the road knight style to put your stuff in baby carriages and push it around the Denmark. You're not allowed to steal or beg, but you're not allowed to do work either. And they wanted to be these road knights, so they spent some effort in getting baby carriages, and they basically walked the earth for 3 days in this hyper-realistic 360-degree illusion. Of course, when you want to immerse your character into a character perfectly, you also want to have the internal or biological experience of being this vagrant. So these guys had the rule that the game would start. Before the game, they would drink themselves senseless. And the game would start when you wake up in hangover, because that is the state of the most road knights in Denmark, I hear, where they actually walk this earth. And if you want to be hungover in the 360 illusion immersive game, you have to actually drink for real. It was funny because they were first thinking that this is kind of a light game, and when it gets too tough, they can kind of say, okay, it's just a game. But when you're in the supermarket and you're trying to find your pocket change, and a kind lady next to you knows the road knights and gives you money to buy the beer, it's very hard to turn into the this is just a game kind of argument. So they were actually stuck in their characters for some time. This is the aesthetic we call pervasive LARP. It's the mixture of pervasive gaming and live-action role-playing. And the point is that you don't have limits. All the world is a stage. The game could last 24/7. In a research project we run a game that lasted for 30 days without a pause, actually. You can play with outsiders, and of course that brings you all the ethical, legal challenges. Here's an example from a Finnish game, Neon Twilight, that is about racism and minorities and mythology. So basically the idea is that you have basic contemporary Finland, but there are some trolls in there, and the trolls are the metaphor for the outsider and for the racial conflict and so forth. One of the things they did in Neon Twilight, they organized a gig. Oh, you can't really see it. Anyway, some of the guys decided to play a troll band. So they became a band and they rehearsed. They had 5 people. Their lead singer had never been singing in front of the audience before. Their second guitarist had never had a guitar in his hand before. And they started to turn themselves into a band. And I don't think they really played that well on their gig, because they had been rehearsing for 6 months only. But the point is that when you have an audience, and the audience is all our LARPers, and they are pretend players, and everyone tells them that these are the greatest stars in the world, and this is the best gig ever, and you have 50 to 100 people in the audience that are going wild. And the band is getting the adrenaline rush of having an audience that is going wild. It actually turned into a really good gig, which is really strange. It's especially strange because it was also a really good gig for outsiders, because this was a pervasive LARP, so everyone was invited. It was a public gig. And the people who had no idea that there was a game going on also had a pretty good gig, even though these guys were on their first and last gig, and that guy had never sung in front of the audience before. The previous speaker mentioned that, or one of the previous speakers mentioned that games need to be fun. And this is a notion that is very highly criticized in the Nordic LARP community. We're talking about positive, negative experience. When you have these fictional experiences, even though you know that they are not real, you can have real emotions. So when you are in that bunker in the middle of the nuclear war, and you've been there for 18 hours, and your daughter is crying in your feet, it might actually get pretty hard for you as well emotionally. And this is really much a goal in many of these games. They are supposed to feel bad. Maybe it's because of the catharsis. Maybe it's because of what Aaron Smuts calls a rich experience theory, that we appreciate all experiences, whether they are positive or negative, because we want to have new experiences. One example of that is a LARP called Europa that was played in Norway in 2001. They wanted to simulate the situation refugees and asylum seekers are in Norway when they enter this system of refugee centers. They had like 50 people from different Nordic countries. They had a simulated history where Nordic countries were in a Balkan-like state of war. And all these were taken into this Orsinian refugee asylum and mixed and matched randomly, like Norwegians mixed and matched semi-randomly the Balkans when the Balkans came into Norway for seeking asylum. And then they are there in the asylum for 4 days. And the challenges in this game are in the way of find toilet paper. It's very hard to find the toilet paper because there is not enough toilet paper in the asylum, and all the stuff consists of LARPers who come from Murmansk, from Russia, who have no common languages with you. And then you're trying to find toilet paper, and you're trying to figure out how to deal with the Danes and Norwegians and Swedes who are living in the same room with you. So they got pretty deep into the ethnic conflict, and I hear they cried a lot during that 4-day game. And I think I hear it was also awesome. One of the things that makes it possible is that people workshop these games before they play them. In a fashion pretty similar to what is done in the sphere of theater. And here you can see two illustrations from a game called Totem, where they played tribal people, and they were simulating both their status conflicts by screaming and yelling, and also their own way of making love by touching each other's hands. And they were rehearsing these ways of expressing themselves in order to take the conflicts out of the in order to simulate the conflicts without real violence. They wanted to make, for instance, this status conflict. Also, they wanted to simulate sex without real sex, so they wanted to create something else, and that's basically caressing each other's arms. During the 15 or so years Nordic scene has been talking about this stuff, a number of design philosophies have emerged. Here are some of the most important ones. People have been writing manifestos about these. People have been writing games based on these. People have been criticizing each other for using these. But I'll just underline this three. The first one is character immersionism. If you're an immersionist player, you're supposed to do whatever your character would do, no matter whether it destroys the game for everyone else. You're supposed to try to be that captain in the bunker. You're supposed to be whatever you are, and you're supposed to kind of get as deep into the character as possible. Some people think it's great because the experiences are great. Some people don't think it's great. So one of the other philosophies is dramatism, wherein you're supposed to understand the game you're playing in and kind of your own position in the big picture of the game, and you're supposed to kind of produce a good dramatic arc for the other players with the use of your character. So for instance, if you're playing in a game like Hamlet, you're supposed to murder the Hamlet or someone else only in the last moment of the game, because that's where the emotional impact might be most appropriate. The third and the newest of these design philosophies is bleed. Bleed is what happens when you try to be your character, and you're talking about characters and playing in characters, but it starts to hurt or feel good for real. The game is bleeding through your character into you. For instance, when you're in the bunker and the Soviets are firing the nukes, if you start to cry for real, and if you feel sad after the game, then you've probably experienced bleed. One of the games, it's called Fat Man Down, has a rule that the fattest male player plays the fat man, and then all the other players are trying to make the fat man's life hell. And that is a really bleedy game because the fat man is played by a really obese person, and whenever they mock him or say something funny about him, it's actually about his body, not his character's body. Gamism is the oldest, perhaps, of the LARP philosophies, which is about treating the LARP as a game and trying to win it. And this is actually shunned in the Nordic LARP scene. It's not, the purpose of the LARP is not to win, the purpose of the LARP is to, well, choose one of the three others. Many of these games are political, and as you might guess by now, they tend to be with a hippie agenda of leftist, green, liberal, pacifist, and feminist. But other stuff have also been done. It's a little bit interesting because LARP is a fairly chaotic affair. When you put the people in the bomb shelter, you don't really know what they're going to do. So everyone is able to have their own interpretation, and everyone is also able to create their own meanings within the game. So if you're driving, if you're in the bunker, you can of course start preaching for the rightist or militarist agenda, and then that's part of the game. So you never know as a game organizer. In the end, I'd like to briefly look at the impact of the Nordic LARP scene through 3 case examples. First one is Østerskov Efterskole in Denmark. In Denmark, they have a school for 10th graders that teaches every subject through LARP. They teach math and German and Danish and biology and whatever in these 2-week modules. In some module, I think this is probably something about the British imperial era stuff. And they play that in a LARP way manner for 2 weeks, and everything they want to teach the kids is taken to that LARP. So then you might be counting coffee or something. And they are fully supported by Danish government. Another example is Project System that was organized in Czech Republic, inspired by the Nordic LARP. They decided, the Czech LARP organizers felt that the young generations of Czech people, they don't really remember what it was like in the Soviet era. So they wanted to create this Soviet youth camp to kind of remind them, the new generation, about what was it like in their own childhood. And the interesting part about Project System was that they highlighted not only the dystopia of the Czechoslovakia, but they also tried to highlight the utopia of Czechoslovakia. So they tried to make it both sweet and sour experience for the new people. I think they're running it every year now or something. And the third example is a game called Conspiracy for Good that was organized by some people who have been very deeply into Nordic LARP scene. This is an example of how the Nordic LARP scene has been lately collaborating with the big media. So this was a transmedia project coordinated by Tim Kring, the creator of Heroes, sponsored by Nokia and other companies and so forth. So they really try to make it big in terms of creating a new way of interactive medium for people to have in the internet and also in the physical world. So this is what I'd like you to remember. First person audience, character immersionism versus dramatism versus bleed. I'd like you to remember that games are not only for fun. I'd like you to remember that 360 ideal is central for this kind of expression. And of course, pervasive LARP is one way of doing a very good and cheap 360 illusion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Markus, are there any questions directly responding? No questions? Okay, great. So I think what's going to happen next is actually quite interesting, because Simon from Slingshot in England is going to come in and run a zombie school, and they're doing a huge citywide zombie game in all kinds of cities in UK right now. And I think it's really interesting to think about what this sort of expression of a zombie game is in relation to LARPing, because I think there's very strict rules in that game, and LARPing is sort of rule-free. So maybe you could just comment on sort of the role of rules, or do LARPers talk about rules?
Right. Okay. So in LARP there are two things. There's the core process of embodied pretend play, or improvised acting with each other, and that is usually not seen as a system of rules, of course. LARPers do have rules, like special game mechanics, when they want to emphasize something or process something in a different way. For instance, in the tribal LARP, they had the sex simulation mechanism by rubbing each other's hands. So they are used to kind of make artistic points. They are used to convey a story. They are used to simulate things that are not desirable in that game to be done physically. And sometimes there are more of them. Usually in these kind of LARPs I showed pictures of, there are very few rules, like there might be 2 rules, but they are still used, of course.
Like in this fantasy setting you were showing, in the fantasy setting, for example, what if people want to use their swords, and or in the bunker someone wants to kill somebody else or something?
Precisely.
In the final stage of the game.
So in the bunker game, I think there were no rules for such a situation. The game masters are counting on people's common decency to be able to negotiate it if it's relevant. So usually pretended fighting is a good method. In the fantasy game, I think they used softened swords and full force, but I'm not entirely sure because I wasn't there. They were originally thinking about ways of how people would even be able to fight the dragon, but they had to scratch that because it was too dangerous, I think.
So what kind of training do players have to do before they can enter the LARP?
The question of what kind of training players need before they can enter a LARP. Usually nowadays, in these high-end, higher production value LARPs, there are like 1 or 2 workshops before the game, and also the players collaborate with the game organizers with costumes, with creating social dynamics, social groups, figuring I'm your father, you're my son, you hate me, I love you, kind of stuff. But it's basically it's like a couple of days of preparation. But depending on the game, in some cases, like in the case of the Hamlet, I think they prepared for months and months, all the players as individuals. So it really changes. And also the games are pretty expensive, so 150 euros is not an unheard of kind of fee for the game. And then you pay for your costume for 200 more.
He mentioned the zombie school, and as I understand it, they sell the zombie school as a product in several cities, and people buy into it. And is this something that's only run by enthusiasts, or is there any commercial basis to this too? In some.
The problem is in many of these LARPs is that they are very difficult and time-consuming to produce. You have to get the spaceship, basically. And in the immersive 360 illusion, where you try to find the character immersion, 1 player can ruin the experience for 10 others. So they want to be. They are not like exclusive, but they want to select their players a little bit. And if you were doing it commercially, then you would be unable to do that pretty much. So that is one of the reasons why this hasn't gone commercial in that way. But if you want to restage one of these games in your city, usually the organizers are really happy to collaborate and contribute. So some of the games are being taken to New York actually at the moment.
I have a question about your pervasive LARP. You spoke about Neo Twilight or Neo Twilight, I think it was called, the one game you
Neon Twilight.
Neon Twilight. So where there is you said there was a racial sensitivity or ethnic sensitivities there. I mean, what is the intention of a game like that when it comes into the public space and sort of connects with people that aren't part of the game, or have I misunderstood?
It can connect with people who are not part of the game, and there are many reasons of doing that. One reason is that it's for the players it can be an experiential thrill, of course, to LARP someone you're not with someone who doesn't know that you're LARPing. Of course, there are ethical issues with that. Another point can be the political point. For instance, in the Junkyard game, they wanted the outsiders to come into the Junkyard area and see how they lived in there and kind of experience the society is drowning in junk, literally. So there are many motivations you can do this. It's just a technique, basically. Also in the Vagrant game, that made it possible for the players to experience how it is to be a Vagrant, how people react to Vagrants, how Vagrants react to people, so forth. But I'm not saying the ethical issues weren't there. They definitely are, and they are talked a lot.
I have two questions, a shorter technical one and another one. Is there any role of the game masters during the game time, and if so, how are they present? And the other one is, you mentioned to me before your talk that LARP techniques are being used in Belarus, if I'm correct, for sort of political activism of sorts. Could you elaborate on that?
So first about game masters, it's a little bit of a design aesthetic that game masters are no longer present in the game. They used to be back in the 90s maybe, early 2000s, but gradually they have been dropping out. Nowadays game masters are usually playing like servants or something, so they can see their own creation in action, but they cannot really interfere. One of the very popular things nowadays is the thing they did in the spaceship LARP, where the game masters are game mastering through the inputs and outputs. So the artificial intelligence running the computer was run by the game masters outside the game. So they could influence the game, but they could influence the game only directly as a diegetic entity, that it was the AI. In Belarus, they are using Nordic LARPs. I think Norwegian Nordic LARPers have been collaborating with Belarus people and later on with Palestinian people in creating LARPs and scenarios that in some sense process their national history or process the totalitarian or whatever environment they are in. And they have created scenarios in collaboration with the people, and they have been played in those environments. Maybe the most prominent example was a game called 1943 that was organized in Belarus, that was about how the German and Soviet invaders behaved when they were in the country. Because today's history, if I understood correctly, today the official line is that the Soviets were the good guys and the Germans were the bad guys, while the reality was that the Germans were the bad guys and the Soviets were also the bad guys. And they wanted to make this kind of obvious to LARP. But I can put you in contact with those people if you want later on, because they're happy to share, I'm sure.
Okay, so thanks everyone. I think we're going to take a quick break right now to set up for the zombie school and get some air in here. But I think, Markus, when do you have to leave? Are you still around for a while? Or?
I'm leaving in like 1 hour or something.
Okay, so you have 1 more hour to approach Markus and keep on discussing. And thanks very much for the super interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so we'll see if we can find Simon from the zombie school.